Hello, hello, yo plebs. Welcome to another episode of Bob Radio. Bob stands for Build on Bitcoin. Today, we have episode 19, and our very special guest today is a returning guest and also a resident of the Genesis cohort of Bob Builder's residency. We have Mr. Dan Gould of Payjoin and Payjoin Development Kit. Welcome, Dan. How you doing today, sir?
I'm wearing my Bob hat. I'm stoked to be back. Thanks for having me, guys.
Awesome. I'm going to take your word for it since this is only a radio show, but you're an honest guy. You never lie. Honest Dan. All right. We'll start the radio show with rapid fire questions from my co-host, Sovereign Skate. Let's take us away.
Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to have Mr. Good with us today. Dan, are you ready for some rapid fire fun? No overthinking here. Just go with your gut. Ready?
Ready.
First one, favorite covenant proposal.
OpCat. That's the only one with my name in it.
Second one, if you could choose a Bitcoin developer to work with, who would you choose?
Oh, man. I feel like I choose the ones that I'm already working with.
Beautiful. Third one, is everything good for Bitcoin?
Debatable. Yeah, I don't know about that one. I think there are attacks on Bitcoin. There definitely are. They exist.
Last question, and then over to Piccolo. What does Dan Good when he's not coding?
Hopefully I'm behind the console of a snowmobile as much as possible.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Back to you, Piccolo.
Okay. All right, Dan. We've talked quite often, but I also have heard you on other programs. But would you mind telling our audience briefly about your Orange Pill journey? How did you find Bitcoin, and how did you find yourself, building on Bitcoin?
So my favorite answer to give on a radio show is that I found Bitcoin through podcasts. I think it was Leo Laporte, This Week in Tech, back probably in 2013, 2014 is when I first started hearing about it, but I didn't get into it in earnest until later. And then in university, I found some other people who were working on privacy protocols in particular on Bitcoin, and I got involved with them. Ethan Heilman in particular just gave so much time of his own to explain scripting and the politics inside how consensus works. And I just stuck with it with a passion for open source.
Cool. And how specifically did you start, let's say, contributing to Bitcoin? Because if I'm not mistaken, Payjoin wasn't your first project in Bitcoin, was it?
No, the first contribution I ever made was pathetic, really, but everyone has to start somewhere. I started by, I think, changing the formatting in a configuration for the Tumblebit project, which is the privacy protocol I mentioned earlier that Ethan Heilman was working on. So I worked on Tumblebit for a while, which is a payment channels. Uh, it does both payment channels and something similar to CoinJoin with an untrusted tumbler, but it requires both peg in and peg out. It requires more transactions than just a CoinJoin. So, and it requires that the coordinator front a bunch of liquidity. It works kind of like Arc, actually, but this was 2016. So from there, everyone working on that project watched the CoinJoin protocols dominate the practical privacy use case, and I really started paying attention to that. I started working on an iOS app that let you do that a little bit before I found Payjoin, which seemed to me to be more of a practical solution because it doesn't require any coordinator. It's just peer-to-peer and it happens at the time of transaction. So I started to focus on that, and I started to focus on the problem less as one that could be solved by a particular application and more as one that really needed to be solved by a systems improvement in the way we all use Bitcoin. And what I mean by that is we can pay join by using a library that anyone that develops a Bitcoin wallet or a Bitcoin business can use. So it really followed the footsteps of Bitcoin Dev Kit and Lightning Dev Kit to have a Payjoin Dev Kit now. So by following the model that they left a good model for, I was able to package Payjoin in a very palatable way that all these different wallets can now integrate. Yeah.
Cool. Did you work in a fiat organization before being an open source contributor, or your professional journey was always as an open source guy?
I definitely dabbled in fiat land, but I was in college when I got started. So by the time I was ready to contribute all of my time to some work product, it was as much as possible in Bitcoin as I could. And
Yeah.
Bitcoin was really the avenue through which I was able to contribute to open source too. It wasn't just that I wanted to contribute to Bitcoin at first. It was really I wanted to contribute to open source. I had a lot of inspiration from Matt Mullenweg starting WordPress and how prolific that product was able to make websites. You know, I saw normal people that ran typical mom and pop businesses or otherwise able to use technology through the power of open source and this feedback loop where anyone who uses software can contribute back and make it better for everyone else that uses the software. And Bitcoin, as we know now, naturally strengthens that.
Yeah, that's fascinating because we might have talked about this. I don't remember, maybe in Nashville, but as a young person going through college, and at the time, I guess, if you have any sort of technical capability in, CS, you would have been targeted by the big four, right? All the big tech companies. And it's interesting that instead of being attracted to that, you were more attracted to open source. Why, Dan? Or was there something specifically about open source, or something specifically about those big tech that, you know, uh, pushed you towards open source?
I've always been interested in innovation and entrepreneurship. And at the time, it did not seem like joining the big four was the best avenue to pursue those things. Like, yes, those companies have obviously innovated in massive ways and tangibly changed the way each of us goes through the world, whether we use their products directly or not. And we do all directly use their products. And a lot of my contemporaries, a lot of my friends, in school went on to go to those places. But I think I was just, in some ways, I was taken more seriously by the people that were working on open source because they needed people to help them with their projects. So they were like, oh, yeah, you can actually change this if you help. And it didn't feel that way so much going to a Google office where I knew I would be a cog in a machine and I probably wouldn't have quite as much say over what I'm working on. And, I don't really know if my analysis at the time was correct. I think if I had worked at Google, I could have definitely worked with people who were more skilled than I was more immediately because I've spent a lot of cycles in isolation. And I think having that mentorship and feedback review, which came later, is really valuable to a budding developer. So definitely, like I'm in New Hampshire right now, so the state motto is live free or die. I think that absolutely contributes to wanting to work more in open source and contribute to freedom tech, but it really could have been either way to start. At this point, I doubt that I would go that avenue in the future, but the opportunity, especially to travel too, I was always into this idea that you could do design your lifestyle with more options if you can be productive wherever you have an internet connection. And because of that interest, yeah, just that kind of shaped the open source contributions and deliberately not joining a corporate environment, which, it paid off for all of us during the pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of what you've mentioned, especially in the latter part of your answer, um, reminds me of this thing that have I ever talked to you about my uh, thing or philosophy about the power of one? I must have, right? And where the open source way of work really, again, leverages on the power of one, where you're one guy, you're building your stuff, but because of digital connectivity, those ones can leverage off other ones throughout the world, right? Because in a given organization, you don't have those that many ones, I guess. When I talk about the power of one, I'm talking about a guy who can actually uh, vision something, plan it, work on it, deliver it, right? I mean, the world nowadays have gone by way of specialization. So the ability to deliver a product from visioning through to execution delivery is quite rare in this day and age. But with open source software, the power of one is becoming more apparent again. And I think the leverage of the open source network incentivized by, monetary incentives, which is Bitcoin, is going to be something to behold. We talked about this, didn't we? Or did I mention it at some point? We
I
must have.
don't
I
know
must
if
have.
you mentioned it exactly as the power of one. You've mentioned all of these themes in
Mm,
conversation a number of times. I definitely do think working outside of an institution gives you the ability to say no a lot more than within, where if you don't want to do something, you really don't have to do it. That's the biggest difference, and that probably allows the individual differences that I think you're getting at, that each individual can have their contributions or focus on their one thing. It lets that shine.
yeah. Okay. Cool. Do you have a Bitcoin philosophy, Dan? I mean, because you know how in in today, early 2024, you have you know monetary maximalists in Bitcoin. You have the NGU guys. You have people who believe that Bitcoin should be pure to do this and not that. Where do you stand?
I really like stay humble and stack sats. I don't think it can be much more concise than that. I try not to be too ideological because I feel like that kind of cuts off options within Bitcoin where like I feel like there's so much we can build on Bitcoin that gets vetoed by a collective. And if you want to maintain that individual contribution and ability for Bitcoin to emerge to its full potential, yeah, I try not to be too negative about ideas uh, and have a particular philosophy where like Bitcoin should be this one thing. I see it as solving some problems in people's lives, and if we can alter it or build software on top of it to solve more problems, that's interesting, and I want to participate in that.
Yeah. Nah, I'm probably sort of along the same wavelength. Because I think at the end of the day, ideology, if sort of taken to extremes, leads to dogmatism, right? And then once it becomes dogmatic and you have an entrenched position, that means that you can't be wrong. And I think that's the beginning of the end, because I think this is still an ongoing thing where we still do need to question certain assumptions always. Otherwise, this thing stops growing, stops developing, and I don't think we'll ever achieve a potential of what it can be. Because, I mean, the way I kind of think about it is, have you seen like maybe one of those pictures where you have several people blindfolded touching different parts of an elephant and, you know, having to describe what it is? A lot of it,
Oh
I
yeah.
think, is that, yeah. So a guy who's touching the tail is so sure that, whatever, that we're basically having to follow this, whatever, maybe not an elephant, might think it's a whatever, a tiger or whatever it is, and somebody else thinks it's some other thing. And the thing is, that doesn't even fully describe how Bitcoin is, because by even abstracting something to a picture of an elephant, different people touching it, can't even describe what being Bitcoin is. So I think having, let's say, rooted ideology is dangerous, right? It gets to almost the point of religious fervor. You know what I mean? And the thing that I've heard quite often, because sometimes I throw online, I go listen in on these different discussions, and the thing which worries me is there seems to be, well, quite a big camp, and probably, maybe less knowledgeable camp, I would say, that says that Bitcoin is perfect, right? Dan, if Bitcoin is perfect, fuck, what the hell are we doing here? Why are we even why is there even, what, you understand what I mean? That's why even have a discussion if Bitcoin is perfect? Then we don't even need to do anything with it, which I don't know. That's a little bit of a rant. What do you think of it?
I was just listening to the last podcast that Charlie Munger recorded where he's interviewed by John Collison. And John asks him what he thinks about cryptocurrency. And, he doesn't think very highly of it, but I think he does have an incredible mind for assessing value, obviously. His track record is amazing. And, he's still wrong. And that I think that's where kind of dogma leads us. And yeah, I don't blame a guy that's nearly 100 years old for not understanding Bitcoin, or even for having, some, I don't know if I would call them ideological views, but for having some institutional views, some views from his circle that prevents him from understanding what this thing is. But if Bitcoin was perfect, he would understand it. So that definitely proves it's not.
Cool. All right. Follow-up question. Because just now, when Sovereign asked you about your favorite covenant proposal, you said OpCat. Why OpCat, Dan? Because again, I've being again kind of on the verge of learning technical stuff. I've been led to believe that OpCat is dangerous potentially, right? Concatenate. You slap different commands together, whatever. Doesn't that potentially lead to dangerous consequences unless you have, are you saying that you can do OpCat with safeguards that Satoshi didn't think of when he took the opcode out?
Yeah, most of the dangers that I've heard in reference to OpCat are that they could somehow enable someone to force drive chains on people, and people don't like the minor incentives drive chains has. I totally understand how that's possible because I think it would require people, miners run software from the typical, cat and software, and it's also, far and away inefficient compared to just having the one opcode. But to me, I don't really, even though I said that, I don't have a super strong opinion on we need this code opcode now. Uh, but cat's fun to me because I was involved. So there's some cryptographers in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we just had lunch and we got together. And Ethan Heilman, who authored that BIP, had been writing this. He had a draft of the OpCat BIP to re-enable it for years that he hadn't brought out. And we got together at lunch and he said, "How hard is it to get a BIP?" And I had just submitted the draft for the BIP 77 Payjoin version 2 BIP. And I said, "Oh, you just write it. It'll get reviewed. Like people will review it based on its merit. That's the whole point of the BIP process. That's the whole point of the mailing list." And him and Armin Saburi, just they took it across the line, and in that regard, at least to start the BIP process. So that's really why I favor Cat. I'm not sure how founded the attacks are. It seems to me like Cat is a relatively basic Unix-like building block where it's a small opcode. It's a small element of the program that does one thing, and it lets us do a bunch of magic. And even if you do the magical things, it's somewhat inefficient. So you would want to fork in efficient replacements, like what would you call that? Just an opcode that does all of the things that your complicated script that cat enables does. So, and it was also already in Bitcoin before, and it was taken out not because of all these dangers for consensus, but because I think there was a stack limit that it could exceed. It could, like, you could concatenate too much data that would exceed this stack limit, and now with TapScript that's fixed. So I don't really know. The reason I'm interested in it is because I was involved in a very tangential way, and I'm really excited to see the Taproot wizards use that as a platform to get people excited about being involved with Bitcoin development. Whether or not that has the most merit among whatever is going to be the next soft fork or not, I don't know. But I think Cat gets me the most excited, and that's
Okay.
fun.
Yeah, interesting. Because actually, I mean, honestly speaking, it is the simplest opcode to understand for layman, right? Concatenate. I mean, if you understand English, you understand exactly what it means. So yeah, and we'll see. I mean, again, these are stuff where now I'm gonna have to question certain assumptions, right? And having to verify whether what I've been led to believe is correct. And I think the guys at Taproot Wizards are gonna come up with samples on how these things work. So yeah, let's see. All right.
Yeah, let's just have some fun with Bitcoin. It doesn't all need to be banging our head against the table and arguing on Twitter. Like I see people actually having fun, and there's oh, what do they call it? The a BIP land where they show the roadmap
Oh
of the actual
yeah.
process to get not only a BIP started, but get a consensus change to Bitcoin deployed. Like that kind of stuff wasn't happening
Yeah.
before they raised money and before they not even them, but before the OpCat proposal was back in. So this comes back to sort of the dogma and the ideology and all of that. Like if they are going to use this art platform to pique interest in the consensus development process of Bitcoin and get people who were otherwise not interested in Bitcoin because they thought it was a shiny rock that didn't do anything, then that's good for Bitcoin.
Yeah. I mean, the way I look at the Taproot Wizards, again, don't really have any use for NFTs, don't really care about it. But the way they've kind of, push the use of, PSBTs and how, Rendell was doing his thing. The what is that thing? The I forget what the cat thing is.
I think he's
Yeah,
implementing object sig from stack in cat.
yeah.
I think that's the latest thing that came out today, which is so this all comes from a paper that, or not a paper, but a series of blog posts that Andrew Polster posted again years ago because Opcat, I believe, is enabled. No, I don't think it actually is enabled on Liquid because at least the new version, the re-enabling of Opcat is a TapScript code, not the previous opcode that it once was. But the blog post talks about all of these different constructions you can make with Opcat alone, and I think Randell is implementing one of those to start.
Cool. All right. I think we better depart from covenant discussion because I'm sure we'll have many more to come. And yeah, at some point, let's do like a covenant show or something. But before we move on to talking about, you know, Payjoin and PDK and your professional stuff, Sovereign, you have any other questions for Dan on this section with his personal journey in philosophy?
Not on this section, neither on covenants, but PDK and Payjoin itself, yeah.
All right. Okay, let's move on. So for this next section of the show, we talk about your project. So Dan, describe to us what Payjoin is, and why should Bitcoiners care about it?
Payjoin is a way to scale Bitcoin, save fees, and preserve privacy without any consensus change to Bitcoin. It works on the Bitcoin that exists today. How it does that is by letting two wallets talk to each other without the blockchain. So you can just send messages over the internet to construct transactions. And then by doing that, you can break some assumptions about how your typical transactions are created. And you have an opportunity to batch what I call your payment intents. So if I want to pay you and you want to consolidate an input, we can do that at the same time. And if we do that at the same time, then we turn two transactions into one and we save on some overhead fees that any single transaction needs to pay and save money. That's the gist. And the best part about it is that unlike some other batching proposals that require you run all this software on top of your wallet with timers and UTXO management, or some of this privacy software that requires you take an explicit step to use a coin join. Payjoin happens right when you make a payment if it's available. So you scan a QR just like you normally would, or you tap your phone NFC, and the protocol happens in the background, and the result is a Payjoin if it works or not. So it's privacy by default and a way to save fees.
right, without requiring a coordinator as well, right? Within Payjoin, you just need the wallet software of the sender and receiver to both support Payjoin. Is that correct?
Yeah, you need to be able to send messages to one another. So you definitely can use a relay, but fundamentally all you need to Payjoin is to have two different wallets talk to one another.
Cool. Well, tell us a little bit about the so far, because I mean, there've been quite a bit of progress on the project itself. And last I looked, I was looking this morning, and actually one thing which really helped highlight a use case. So for people who are not familiar and all that, really good description of what PayJoin does to break, the input payment heuristics, right? But also the case study. I mean, that was really cool. I don't know if that and that came from the Bitcoin design guys. Was that Mark that helped do that, or
That
was
was
that a separate effort?
Yashraj.
Oh yeah, sure. Okay.
Yashraj, yeah. Yeah. So I'd say 2023 was the first year Payjoin got a full-time effort from anyone. And it started the year from a design approach, going backwards, saying, okay, if we can Payjoin, what would that look like if it existed in your typical spending wallet, which is a Bitcoin design kit, Bitcoin design community effort? They always try to look at things from that perspective first. And Connor Uckus from Bitcoin Design helped me put together a challenge, as did Christoph. We, Yashraj found this and we went back and forth quite a bit at the beginning of 2023, and he turned it into a whole design guide with an interactive UI and some suggestions. And now we have this reference that anyone implementing Payjoin can look at to see, okay, what are the constraints? What do I have to think about? And how would I actually integrate this in my software? We also found some constraints that led to Payjoin version 2. We found what we believed to be the limiting factors for people actually adopting this in this wallet. And, we've been able to, over the past year, not only come up with that solution, but deploy it in software.
Nice. So for sort of folks out there who want the PayJoin experience, what do they need to do? They need to basically install the software or the wallets, and they're listed on your website, right? That currently support PayJoin, and make sure the other side has something similar and go from there, or are there additional steps? Because we're just
Yeah,
interacting with users are interacting with the front end, right? We don't have to care about what's happening on the back end. That's the wallet's job, correct?
yeah, like I said, if your wallet supports Payjoin, which more and more are as the year goes on, then it will happen automatically in the background. It uses the Bitcoin URI, which is a lot like the URL in your web browser, to take the parameters of basically a Bitcoin invoice. It includes an address, it includes potentially a Lightning invoice, it includes potentially an amount and potentially a Payjoin endpoint. And if your wallet supports Payjoin, you can look on payjoin.org to find out if it does. Then if it sees that the destination for the payment can support Payjoin, it'll just automatically happen. You might see a little switch in your UI showing you that it's happening, and you can get the benefits automatically. And if you run a business where you want to batch to save money because you're spending a lot of fees on UTXOs, then you can include Payjoin so your users would have that. And when they pay you, you would just batch transactions automatically in the background and be able to save some money.
This is from the point of the saving money. This is if you're the receiver. Yes.
Typically, yes, yes. But there are
What if
some
here's a
scenarios For example,
So,
if you're opening Lightning channels, you're kind of the sender and the receiver on both sides
mhm,
of that, and you can save a transaction by using Payjoin if your node is Payjoin enabled. And if you're a sender, you typically get the privacy benefits. That's why you would do it. The privacy benefits
right.
are a little bit better for the sender. Sorry, the privacy benefits are a little better for the sender, and the fee savings benefits are a little better for the receiver. But ultimately, there are fee savings for both because you're batching your payment intents into a single transaction, as long as you can agree to each split the fees, which the software is set up to do.
Ah, okay. Because generally speaking, if it's like a two-party, payer receiver, for that privacy benefit, I would imagine that typically the payer would pay a bit more in transaction fees to receive that benefit, right? But not if you're batching transactions where the other party is also making some sort of payment or UTXO consolidation, I guess. Because that
Yeah,
that
the
thing is,
rec
I'm trying to understand the fee split that you're talking about because I'm maybe I'm having trouble about how the sender can save on fees because I would expect that you pay for what you get. So you receive additional privacy benefits generally means it costs me a bit more. So I'm curious how I can get the best of
right.
both worlds, you see.
Yeah, so the sender can specify how much fees they're willing to spend in their request to the receiver, and they could request an amount that's, doesn't include any additional inputs from the receiver. So then it gives the receiver an opportunity to add inputs, but the sender is not going to pay for them. The receiver could make a decision then automatically in software that if they're going to save money by batching, they could take that opportunity to do it or not. And then if a wallet was more privacy conscious, it could set so that, and this is what's recommended in the in the BIP, the specification for typical operation, the sender could say, propose that they are willing to pay for one additional input from the receiver to get that privacy benefit, but they don't have to do that.
Okay, got it. Very nice. Um, oh, I was sharing it out chat, but yeah, talk a little bit about, some of the recent developments, now that we've gone over what PayJoin is, what PayJoin Development Kit is. What has been some developments then that you would want to highlight for our audience as well as other developers out there who may want to jump in and contribute to the project?
Yeah, I think the thing that we should stress the most that I'm proud of is the contributors that have come up and contributed to the Payjoin Dev Kit. So we've got Isra, who just got sponsored by Spiral to work on Payjoin Dev Kit full time. Bitcoin Xavier has been working on bindings so that no matter what language you're using, you can use the Payjoin Dev Kit. Brandon Lucas just put together this payjoin.org website. So there's a whole ecosystem that's being built around Payjoin so that everyone can use it. Because the library alone is not enough. People have to actually see it, and they need to see it to believe it. So there's that documentation layer. That's the website that you're looking at. There's also payjoindevkit.org, in addition to the executive summary that's on payjoin.org. Now that we have the CLI tool, Payjoin CLI, that released a couple months ago, which you can use to make Payjoins with Bitcoin Core, we're working on the version 2 in earnest. So the Payjoin version 1, you need to actually run a server. The Payjoin version 2, you can delegate kind of like a Noster, that communication layer to a relay. And these relays just pass messages between the sender and the receiver. And the protocol has network privacy built in. So getting that working in production has been the main focus of the past few months, and we'll be seeing a lot more of that in the first quarter of 2024.
Very
And that's
nice.
going to let all sorts of wallets implement Payjoin that weren't able to before. So before, a lot of mobile wallets just implemented the send side because they couldn't host a server. Or if they hosted a server like Join Market does, then they relied on Tor, and not every device or environment can use Tor. So with this version 2 protocol, pretty much anyone that can make internet connections and talk to the Bitcoin network should be able to use Payjoin with this library.
Sweet. Oh, quick question. So for PageOne CLI, this when using with Bitcoin Core, does this work for testnet as well?
Yeah, if you have a testnet node, it'll work as normal. Cool thing about Payjoin is it really only deals with, there's only two complexities. There's the networking, which doesn't matter if you're on testnet or not, and there's the PSBTs, the transaction signing, really.
Mhm.
So the dev kit sets up all of the request response details. So you don't need to think about that. You can just say, make me a request, and it will make a formatted request for you. And then when you need to do checks to see if the transaction follows the rules of the protocol, or you want to get it signed because you found out that it does, then you just pass in the function to do that from, Bitcoin Core in that example, where you tell the code, go talk to Bitcoin Core. This is an unsigned transaction. If Bitcoin Core likes it, they should sign it. So it doesn't really need to think too much about the network. It should work seamlessly.
Right. Very cool. All right, Sovereign, you got something for that?
Yeah, I'm really curious about an ongoing work with like chain analysis. Dan, given the fact that in a Bayesian transaction, UTXOs do not get tainted considering the lack of a centralized coordinator, is Payjoin the chain analysis killer application, or surveillance at the on-chain layer will be an ongoing work?
It's going to be an ongoing war for sure. There's always cat and mouse, and there are still, even if you do everything perfectly on chain, you can do something stupid like tell someone that you have Bitcoin at a certain address, and then they can leak it to someone, and that can be used to create a profile and surveil you. I don't think it's quite true that Payjoin has no taint. Like, the way to think about the privacy is to look at the white paper where Satoshi says that he only left one privacy problem open in the white paper, that transactions necessarily reveal that their inputs belong to the same person. Because when the paper was written, that's true. In Bitcoin software, if you construct a transaction from a single piece of software where all the inputs come from the same person, then you can make that assumption. But Payjoin breaks that assumption, and that's the most common assumption that's used to track Bitcoin activity on chain. So Payjoin makes that a lot less reliable, even with some small common usage. If it's a possibility that when things get deposited in exchange, that would have been a Payjoin, or that along hops between surveilled intermediaries, that there could have been a Payjoin, there becomes a lot less certainty about how funds moved, whether they belong to one person or another. So yeah, Payjoin doesn't have that clear, overt signature where it's a coin join, but it doesn't completely solve all of the Bitcoin privacy problems magically. It gets rid of the biggest one, and that's why I focused on it, because it's the lowest hanging privacy problem. It makes the assumption that's used most often to spy on people much less reliable. But there's work to be done after that too.
Right. So to scope into a more practical use case, let's say Bob has bought Bitcoin in a KYC centralized exchange, right? Now, this like exchange doesn't support Payjoin. Therefore, once he like transfers his like Bitcoin, his UTXOs to his own wallet, would it be Payjoin like the tool to use in order to like break assumptions, and maybe even like include a CoinJoin mixer when like realizing a Payjoin transaction to break heuristics?
You could certainly do that. You could certainly do that. The cool thing about Payjoin is that because it happens automatically in the background and it gives you this opportunity to batch, you have a financial incentive to do it. At least one of the parties in the transaction has a financial incentive to do it. And it helps us scale Bitcoin because we can have more of these payment intents in every transaction. We can have more people doing what they want in every transaction. Still, if I was going to send Bob some Bitcoin in a Payjoin, Bob would be able to see what inputs mine were, and Bob knows how much they got paid. So it's not a perfect break in the way a coin join is in isolation with so many caveats. Like you can undo the privacy of a Payjoin, or sorry, of a coin join if you do things wrong, but Payjoin doesn't quite have that breaking property where all the inputs and all the outputs are the same amount. But like I said, it breaks the underlying assumption and makes it so dragnet surveillance is a lot more difficult. And it scales Bitcoin. It's free money.
Right. Okay. Understood. Thank you, Dan.
Hey,
You're welcome,
Dan,
Sovereign.
can you do multi-party pay join? Or is it currently just bilateral sender
It
receiver
depends
only?
what you mean by that. So Payjoin in its current form, coordination, is done between two people. But there's nothing stopping me from making a batch transaction that pays both Bob and Piccolo. And then for Piccolo to send my payment on to, let's say, Human Rights Foundation in the same transaction. So in a sense, it allows batching to multi-party, but the actual Payjoin protocol happens between two people for now.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So it's yeah, because I'm kind of thinking about that. Like the three of us where we have certain transactions to conduct between each other, right? So, instead of doing it, me to Bob, Bob to you, you to me, we just do it in one go. But okay, makes sense. Um, yeah, one thing I wanted to comment on was the more you kind of think about these heuristics of chain analysis is quite interesting, right? One is that, and I guess for coin joins and things like that, it's, as you come up with new, let's say, coin join or mixing services, if it's whatever standard size inputs and outputs, that's where the heuristics can still pick up stuff. You know what I mean? That's the thing I kind of like or appreciate about the pay join, where it can be anything. It could be any amounts. So, you know, the heuristic would have to be, well, and it looks exactly like a normal transaction, just that the input heuristic doesn't quite work anymore because now the sender also contributes an input, right? So I think that's the whole thing of being non-standard, I think is going to have to be a thing. Otherwise, the cat and mouse game goes on pretty much forever. Just once you get standardizations of inputs and outputs, that allows for chainalysis to work its algorithm. Right?
Yeah,
am I looking at this correctly?
yeah. Research was just done about wallet fingerprinting. And have you heard of 6ix9ine? Do you know, like a graphical ordering where you put transaction inputs and outputs deterministic?
No. Tell me.
So there was this idea that if every transaction puts inputs and outputs in the same order no matter what, then you won't be able to fingerprint wallets. And so like Trezor Suite does this. Problem is only a few wallets do this. And if a cluster doesn't do it, you can rule out that it's not. But if it only does this, you could think, okay, maybe this is Trezor. So sometimes having this deterministic ordering can actually kind of screw up. It can create more heuristics than it's worth. So I definitely do think have something some transaction structure that looks more random is better for privacy. And Payjoin does this. Yeah, it's Ishana Misra. She did this research. You should check it out if you look up that name and wallet fingerprinting. Uh, we're gonna have to send some emails to Trezor to tell them to stop stop their privacy practice because it's actually making it worse.
Yeah. All right. Okay. I think we're hitting the end of the show here. But before we do, I don't know if Sovereign, you got any follow-up questions for Dan before we start moving towards wrap up?
I think we can move on. Yeah, no more questions for Dan.
All right, Dan. Okay, so for the wrap up, before we go to, parting thoughts and what you want to leave our audience with, we flip the table on our guest normally at the end, and give you an opportunity to ask Bob Space, me, Sovereign, a question, any question. And if you don't have one, we can just move on to wrap. Do you have a
Have you
question for
seen
us?
these threads where they keep asking Dolly to make an image more extreme, and it always turns into, like God? You have a
No,
picture of a rabbit, but like make it hungrier for carrots. No, make it even more hungry for carrots. You haven't seen these?
no, no,
Oh,
no. And
Dali, the painter.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I'm curious how you would answer that succession of questions about Bob Space. Like, what's the highest form of Bob Space right now? What do you think it would be? You have workshops, you have mining, you have nodes, but what would make it even more Bitcoin if you could make it more Bitcoin?
Piccolo. I think this is like one of the best questions we ever had.
yeah, you're kind of asking about like the vision sort of question almost, right? Where do we sort of see the transcendence to, I suppose?
Yeah, I guess
Well,
just
for
the
me,
just to start though, where does it go next? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, if you look at like the short term, I suppose 2024, 2025, I mean, you have several events happening, I suppose, not only on the Bitcoin ecosystem, right? You got the halving coming up, and I'll bet you by 2025, we're into deep discussion about a covenant soft fork of some sort. So, so for us, I think, not only do we want to keep sort of the mission going of the education, but keep this thing with the residency going. I mean, we'll launch batch two. What month is this now? January? Yeah, we'll launch batch two of the residency in a couple months. You know, and then from there, I think we're also doing our first bit devs next week, and we want to make that more of a regular thing. The transcendence of where does Bob Space go is I hope we can keep doing this up to a point where we don't need to do it. I think the ultimate form of Bob Space is, people are sort of freely building on Bitcoin and they're forming their own Bob Spaces elsewhere, where the Bob Space is just where you are, right? You're building on Bitcoin. That's your Bob Space. Yeah, I mean I mean the reason I wanted to get there is because then it becomes, a little bit like an open source effort too, and it becomes harder to attack. You know what I mean? So in the future, if you want to sue Bob Space, who the heck are you gonna sue? Where are you gonna send that letter to? Africa? You know, Antarctica, Phuket,
I don't know. Is
Bangkok,
there going to
Chiang
be a
Mai?
Bob Space in Antarctica? Are you going to
I
get a
don't know.
helipad? on the
I
Bob
have no idea,
Space's
Dan.
headquarters?
Dude, somebody needs to keep the network secure. You might need miners and nodes in places where people aren't allowed to go. You know what I mean? But they might already have it there. Who knows? But
Like,
well,
what would Bob
again,
Spaces do with an island? Would you have a resort? Or is that too far outside of the scope?
no,
That's not
yeah, that's
exciting. You
I
wouldn't
don't
have
even.
Bitcoiners.
Yeah, the thing is, if it gets to that scale, I hope I don't have to be the one visioning it. You understand what I mean? Because if it is, then perhaps this whole thing of promoting building on Bitcoin has failed if it depends on one person, two persons. If Bob Space, by the time it's all said and done, has to depend on the initiatives of Sovereign or Piccolo, then I think we're not fulfilling our potential
Let me
because at
sort of
the
list
end.
the ideal experience space resident.
Oh, okay. Now sort of beginning to specific. Well, the ideal sort of experience of the Bob Space resident is, you know, for yourself as now that you're an alumnus of the Bob Space, obviously you have, you avail yourself of the network that we keep building, you know, and you know who to call if you need design, obviously who to call if you need sort of, server help. And then as the second batch comes in, the third batch comes in, and the alumni network builds up, that's where I'm curious to see, because I can't even predict, the cross, project collaborations that people will start sort of having once, you form the basis of that sort of alumni network. You know what I mean? Because one thing that I think we can do is to make sure that the residents, keep staying in contact and to a certain extent keep leveraging of each other, right? And help each other out. And in any way that Bob Space can help uh, support that effort, whether we have to put in time, work, resources, etc., whatever we can do, we will do. That's kind of, yeah, that's I think what we want. Because otherwise without that, it's not a one and done sort of type of deal, right? I know that development is an ongoing effort. It's not a 3 month or 6 month thing. Development doesn't start and doesn't stop during the residency program. It's ongoing. So anything we can help in terms of, well, you see it, not only the resources and all of that, but we also try to bring in mentors, right? And then hopefully as the second batch comes in, you get, more resource platform, more gravity, and hopefully more interactions. Because that's the thing with open source development too, is proving that concept of the power of ones. If the ones connect, what can happen? That's really the question, or at least, I'm trying to answer, or Bob Space is trying to answer.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. So damn, I answered the first sort of part of your question, like really in a what is it called? Long-term way, But going back to that, really, if the real success of Bob Space, Dan, is damn, Bob Space doesn't have to be any one person, any one thing. Wherever you are, that is Bob Space. You understand what I mean?
I
And
do.
hopefully by
Yes.
being able to have that and you get to draw gravity, and then you have, your own Bob Space. That's kind of how I think about it.
So right now, if someone wants to spin up their own Bob Space, they kind of have to. They got to find you. Ideally, they can go to the internet, get a packet, and they have instructions, just like BitDevs. Like, this is how you start a Bob Space.
Okay, now you're bringing up an interesting point. You're talking about like a Bob Space development kit now. BSDK, dude. Okay, that's a separate discussion.
No,
Now, if
we
they want
don't
to
want a
spit,
bullshit development kit. There's enough
yeah,
of
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. It's got to be something else. Some other, I don't know, some other acronym. But yeah, no, I mean, if people do want to spin up a Bob Space, we're available to talk. I mean, we're not, our stuff, whatever we do, we put up on GitHub and all that. And we don't pen any of our shit open source. So yeah, I mean, people can just do it. But that's the hard part, is the doing it thing, right? Then it's easy to think about it, easy to talk about it. It's the doing it and the keep doing it part.
Oh
That's the
yeah, this
hard
whole
thing.
question is about dreaming. It's like, what if there was this kit and then, those that started, they automatically got a stipend from the alumni network to, buy a food for their first 3 events. And if they had a certain attendance, then they'd be able to keep doing that. Or like, I don't know. It's just a fun exercise.
Yeah. Cool, man. All right. Dan, tell our audience sort of where to find you, including for people who want to check out Payjoin, PDK, how to test it out, how to contribute.
And my name is Dan Gould. You can go to bitgould.com to find how to contact me. Payjoin.org, if you've never heard of Payjoin until this, is going to give you an overview of what it is, what sort of trade-offs it makes, why you should use it, how to use it, what wallets use it. Payjoindevkit.org is where you want to go to develop, and there you can join our Discord and say hi, and we'll get you involved in the process. If you want Payjoin in your wallet, don't hesitate to reach out. We'll make it happen.
Perfect. With that, it's a wrap.